our book by Christopher Paul Curtis, the main character sure uses a lot of colorful language, and sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out what he means or what he's saying or what he's trying to get at. And the reason that is because Bud is not very literal. In fact, most children aren't very literal. And so now kind of let me tell you the difference and all the different types, and then hopefully this will help you understand what Bud is trying to say. To be literal means that every word means what the dictionary says it means, like this. Come inside the classroom. That means there is a room and there's class in the room, and I am commanding people to come on the interior of the room that is holding class. Like, that is literal as I could be. Every word means what the dictionary says. Plug in your computer. There is a plug. I put it in something. It's connected to the computer. Now my computer is plugged into that thing. Like, no confusion, right? But now we get into figurative language. Figurative language is a bit harder. The words are put together and do not mean what the dictionary says. Like this. I'm chatting online. If you're chatting, that means your lips are moving and you're talking with your friends. But most people, when they're chatting online, are typing with their fingers. So if they were going to be literal, they would say, I'm typing in a computer, which is connected to the internet, right? Because then when we look at the word online, like what line? Where's the line that you're chatting on? And for those of us who know and understand how technology works, we know that there's a phone line, and we know that there's an electrical wire line, and we know that there's an internet line. But if you, are sitting in a modern building right now, then you don't see those lines that are in the walls or under the ground or in the roof. But when all this technology started coming out, you would actually see the line sitting there. And so the phrase has kept in our language, even though the technology has changed. And same with this example of figurative language here, hang up the phone. When phones were first invented, they were hung up on the wall, but now not so much. Now that's, carried in your hand, and you don't really hang it anywhere. There are many different types of figurative language. For example, there's metaphors, there's similes, there's idioms, hyperbole, personification. And then there's these two other things I'm going to talk about, which is not figurative language, alliteration and rhyme, but they're used a lot in the book, so they're definitely worth mentioning. Our first one to start we're going to talk about is idioms. An idiom is just like a trick of the language. And so if you speak Spanish, in order to say, you translate the word language as idioma, right? So if you want to remember that an idiom is a trick of the idioma, then that's a good way to remember that. And here's a good example of an idiom. You would tell someone, you would say, pull yourself together, man, like pull yourself together. That typically means that things are a little bit unorganized, or the person doesn't have control of their emotions at the time, something like that. And then another idiom would be like, oh, this is getting out of hand. I can't control this anymore, right? And they're just like, there's no hands. Nothing is actually getting out of my hand, right? So it's an idiom. It really doesn't make sense, but it's just something that people say that you have to learn the meaning of. And Bud uses a lot of these. And so it's going to be kind of hard to figure them out. The next type of figurative language is called a metaphor. A metaphor is when you compare two things and then you say that you're the same. Now, in our book, Bud is going to encounter a character who is just not very nice. He bullies him, he hurts him, he humiliates him, he demeans him. And every time this kid gets caught, his mouth was a prayer book. Because, there's the church is the people who run the church are the ones who are in charge of all these orphans, right? So whenever this bully and this mean kid gets in trouble, he starts reciting prayers and talking about characters in the Bible. So of course, he never gets in trouble, right? He manipulates the situation. And so you'll read about this guy, but then that's a perfect metaphor. His mouth was a prayer book. And then I've heard this one a lot, and you'll probably hear it a lot from adults, where they say, oh, my life is an uphill battle. And if you've ever had to fight somebody, fist by fist fighting someone, while going uphill, then you'll kind of understand what they're talking about. And it just kind of gives a visual. And that's why people like this metaphor, because it gives a visual for you to understand kind of what they're feeling, like they just can't win, and they're fighting everybody and everything. Another example of figurative language is a simile. And a simile is very similar to a metaphor. A simile is when you compare two things, except you use the word like or as. And there's a character in the book too, that he holds a pencil not like a pencil. I mean, there's a certain way you hold a pencil in your hand, and there's a certain way you hold a thermometer. And this guy was holding the pencil like a thermometer, like he was going to put the pencil in someone's mouth, right? So that's a perfect example of a simile because it's comparing the pencil and the thermometer and using the word like. And here's just one more example. A teacher was as busy as a bee, right? Just moving all over the place, running all over the room, like, not staying in one place, just all over. I'm sure you guys have had teachers like that before, right? Hyperbole. A hyperbole is just an exaggeration, right? Just one little thing taken to the total extreme, right? So if you've had a good day, you might go, "Oh, life is perfect," but but it's not. All of life is not all perfect in that moment, right? But you definitely have this emotion, like, "Wow, everything is going my way. I feel like the whole world is in order," right? So you want to express an emotion, so you kind of exaggerate things. But of course, there's the other side, and I hear this one a lot. "This is the worst day in the history of ever," right? That's a perfect example of hyperbole. And personification is my next one. Personification is when something that is not a person is given the traits of a person, right? So, for example, if your morning alarm goes off, and then you think, "Oh, I've got time," and then you hit the snooze button, and then you leisurely get up before you realize you're late, you might say, "Oh, my alarm lied to me. I'm going to be late," right? But alarms can't lie, right? So that would be a perfect example of something given a trait of a person. An alarm cannot lie. Now this example here is just, I got to tell you a story with this example here. So I was reading to my second grade class years ago, and the line in the book was, "The sky opened up as a school bell rang." And I thought that it had meant that the clouds in the sky had moved aside and it stopped raining and the kids could play outside. And so I said that to my class. I said, "The sky opened up means it stopped raining." And I remember this little girl, she raised her hand and she says, "No, I don't think so." And I said, "What do you think it means?" And she says that when you're inside the classroom, the walls close you in. So when the school bell rang, it's like the ceiling opened up. It's like the sky opened up and there was hope that you could go do something fun. And I went, "Oh, that's kind of cool." Like this 7-year-old girl completely interpreted the words in a completely different way than I did. And that kind of points out the beauty of books is there's multiple interpretations for one single thing. So I will always remember that sentence probably for the rest of my life, and that little girl's face, "The sky opened up." It's just perfect. Now, as promised, those two other things that aren't quite figurative language, but they show up a lot in our book. Alliteration and rhyme just has to do with the sound of the words. So alliteration is when the beginning sound is all the same. Like, Sister Susie sells seashells by the seashore, right? All the beginning sounds are the same, so it's alliteration. Now, sometimes too, it's just shorter, like this. Mr. Palmer pleaded with him. It's not a whole sentence. It's just two sounds. Palmer pleaded, or you can even say Mr. Palmer, like the repeating sound. But when it happens at the beginning, Palmer pleaded, it's alliteration. When it happens at the end of the word, it's called rhyme. So fought, caught, lot, they all match the sound at the end, so that's a rhyme. Or scary Larry Fairy. And just to point out, rhymes and alliteration, they're not necessarily spelled the same. It's that they sound the same. All right, bring us back to Bud Not Buddy. The final note I wanted to say on figurative language is that cultural differences, differences in geography, and differences in generation are all factored into what kind of figurative language each person uses. And when you put all those things together, it's called a dialect, right? And so I can give you some different examples of different cultures, but you're going to notice them yourself in the book. So I'll just give you 3 right here. And then maybe you can kind of just start paying attention to, if this person talks like this, where are they from? If this person talks like this, what does that tell me about them? Why would the author choose to have this person talk like that, right? So you might say something like, oh, you're as sweet as apple pie. Okay. But sometimes you can have two different words that express the same thing due to different cultures, different geography, or different generation. Now, in this generation, a lot of you say, oh, dude, don't bail. That means please don't leave, right? But my generation, we say, oh, don't ditch me, right? So it's the same meaning, please don't leave, but different cultures or generations say it differently. Now, on the other side of that, sometimes one word can have two different meanings based on culture or geography or generation, right? So if you say, I'm busted, that could either mean you are completely out of money. Look, I'm busted. I ain't got nothing. Or it could mean that you just got in trouble. Dude, he got busted by the cops last night, right? So so even if it's the same word, it could mean something different. Or even if it's different words, it could mean the same thing. So it does get pretty confusing. And so you really have to understand the context of what's happening in the story so you can figure out what he means literally. So look at the worksheet I gave you. And on these pages listed here, you're going to find some examples of figurative language to write in your chart. So page 1, 10, 26, 28, 41, 42, and then the bottom of 91 and the beginning of 92. If you have a different edition of the book, well, then you're just going to have to find it on your own, okay? So you're going to fill out this chart. You're going to fill out what the figurative language was. So you're going to copy it right from the book. Then you're going to tell me what type it was. Then you're going to tell me literally what was actually meant by that. And then the last column says the purpose. Like, why would the author say it like that? Was there an emotional reason he wanted to say it? Was he trying to point out that two people were a different generation? Or was he just trying to be funny? Like, that's what you're going to have to figure out as you read it. So happy reading. Start looking for that figurative language, and I'll see you in small groups.